I had been in psychiatry for nearly 10 years already when, through Dr. George Pransky, I met Mr. Sidney Banks and was exposed to the three principles of mind, thought, and consciousness. At the beginning, I had a strange experience as I listened to Dr. Pransky and then to Mr. Banks over a weekend in San Francisco. And there I was with my 26.5 years of education and all the plaques on my wall, and yet very stressed and chronically and periodically severely depressed. As I listened, a feeling got awakened within me, a feeling of hope, that didn't have to be the course of the rest of my life. And that feeling wasn't necessarily tied to any clear intellectual understanding. But as I started to study and to listen and to reflect, I started to see the following. As Mr. Banks talks, that the principle of mind, he would say, is the intelligent energy of all things, that there is an intelligent energy in the universe. But we can see it everywhere. We see it in nature. I love National Geographic, even though a magazine, even though I don't read it from cover to cover each month. I'm touched by many of the things that I see in there of how this intelligent energy in the world manifests itself. Recently I saw a fish that would travel through the sea. It was a very small fish, but they travel through the ocean in bundles of 30 feet in diameter, swimming in chorus as they go through the ocean. And so to their possible predators, they appear as a huge 30-foot in diameter mass and being that they don't want to mess with. I think that's pretty incredible. From a simple standpoint, we all know that if you take flowers and you cover them on three sides and leave one side open to the sun, the flowers start bending towards the sun. I think that's incredible. I always laugh because roots of a tree, if they come upon cement or something in their way, concrete, in their search for water, they don't start pouting. They go through the concrete and they get the water. So this intelligent energy is there all the time. And as I reflected in my life, I saw that there were many times when I had allowed myself to be quiet enough to let that energy with its intelligence come through me at moments that made tremendous differences in my life. So universal mind, the intelligent energy of all things. Universal consciousness is the gift of awareness. It's the gift that allows us to be aware of life. Without it, we wouldn't be able to be aware. And it also is what makes the third gift, the principle of thought. It takes what we think and brings it to life almost like combustion, so that every human being is constantly, from birth to death, thinking a thought, using the power of mind, and having that thought brought to consciousness as their personal reality. So that from birth to death, we literally live our experience of life on this earth one thought at a time. Sort of like a kaleidoscope that we had as children. So the gift of thought, very profound. And it's the branch, it's the bridge, really, rather, that takes the formless energy of life that was there before the Big Bang. There was something, people have different names for it, but there was a formless energy, and after the Big Bang we have this whole entire universe. Well, the power of thought is formless. Every human being, however, is accessing that power to create zillions of thoughts. We as human beings, they estimate think 70 to 100,000 thoughts a day. That's a lot. And whatever thoughts we think, we experience through our limbic system in our body and our senses, and it comes back to us as a feeling, so that we can always tell what we're doing with our thinking by the way that we're feeling. It gives us feedback. That was important for me to know. So at the beginning, I just had a sense. I started to get a sense. I would start to get angry about something, and I would see that I was the one creating the anger, that it wasn't being caused by things external to me that I had always thought. It was that I had an anger machine inside of me, that when other people in life didn't act according to Bill Pettit's plan, I often resorted to creating an angry feeling in response to that. That was tremendously freeing. It was the beginning of getting out of prison of my own thinking. I started to see that every human being, including my wife, my late wife, was using these gifts as best as we knew how, but experiencing life differently. I saw that no two people experience this life in the same way. And so many times things that we used to bicker about or even argue about, I started to appreciate as we were seeing things differently. And it was important for me, because I did have love and respect for her, to listen as deeply as I could to see what she was seeing that I didn't see. And that's certainly true today, both with my wonderful wife Linda and with my friends and with my colleagues. It's important to know that we are all living in a separate and different reality. Now, what's interesting is the more that we live in a positive feeling state, the less those differences seem to make. They're just not important. They're interesting, and they're a source of new understanding about life. So as I started to get a glimpse of these principles, it was interesting. About every 6 months, I would have this experience of, man, I finally see these principles. And I would get all excited. And then about 6 months later, I would have an experience of saying, oh, boy, now I understand these principles. And this went on and has gone on now for 31 years. Only I've come to realize that understanding and appreciating the depth of these principles is an endless and infinite, if you will, experience. That Mr. Banks used to say that every time you have an insight about them, it's like you go through another door, but there's an infinite number of doors. What has this meant to me as a psychiatrist? First of all, as a human being that had struggled and had spent probably 6 to 9 hours a day for most of my adult life in some form of negative thinking. Worry, guilt, resentment, upset, over-analyzing, unresolved grief, all focusing on thoughts that kept me from the present moment of my life. I think it was Dr. Rollo May who said, it's a shame that many people don't show up for their life at the same time it's going on. And I was one of those. I was spending 40% of my day maybe in the past and another 40% with regret and guilt and resentment, and another 40% I was spending in the future worrying about things that had uncertainty attached to them. And I even found a way to mess up the present. I would be upset about things the way they were when I was in the present moment. So it was important to me to start to find a more peaceful, joyful feeling. And I found that indeed that was the default setting. That all I had to do to get back to that place of peace and a place of lightheartedness and a place of joy and a place of love was to stop paying attention to my low mood thinking. I know that sounds too simple, but believe me, I'm just laying it out as best as I can, that when I realize that I have lost a loving, gentle feeling, I have come to understand that the best thing for me to do is to leave my thinking alone. And we are all fortunate enough that if you will, we reboot to a place of peace and well-being. To be able to start teaching that to patients was an incredible experience. In the first months after I learned this, I worked in a state hospital for a year, and back in my hometown, a 700-bed state hospital, and I saw things happen that I hadn't seen happen before. One lady was there; she was paralyzed, unable to move her lower legs. But it was psychological. It had happened every time in her life that she had experienced a major loss. And so through physical therapy, they kept her from getting strictures in her legs, but this would go on for months. And I started talking to her about these three principles, and it was within 2 to 3 weeks that she was walking again and doing well. In 1984, I had a woman come to me that had been declared totally mentally disabled by the state of Massachusetts. She was 23 years old. For 4.5 years, she'd been immobilized. She'd been treated at a major Mecca in the Northeast, and they had declared her totally mentally disabled. She was on a number of medications, and had been unable to function for 4.5 years. This was a bright woman who had gone to an Ivy League school for about first semester and had come home. And just within 8 days of working with her twice a day, she recovered after 4.5 years of intensive therapy. That before I saw her, she had been seen by a psychiatrist at this institution on a daily basis, 5 days a week, for 8 or 9 months. She had been hospitalized a number of times, and the follow-up is wonderful in that she had not been able to read a newspaper for 3 years. She had not been able to even hold a thought long enough to let you know that something that happened 30 seconds ago. And after recovering her mental well-being, she went on to college, where she graduated with a 4.0 and majoring in mathematics. She went on to get her degree in physical therapy from Columbia University, and works as a physical therapist, as last that I know. She had married an ophthalmology resident, and they had 3 little beautiful boys, and she was fine. This is somebody who had been declared totally mentally disabled. Through the years, I have seen many, many examples, and I hope that during the course that as we go through the different diagnoses, I might be able to share 1 or 2 stories with each one of the diagnoses that is remarkable. And it comes from a firm belief, and to me it's a knowing now, that every human being that I see has mental well-being that has been untouched and can't be touched because it's based on a spiritual truth. But for the innocent misuse of the gift of thought, they could be back in touch with their mental well-being.